Heritage Foundation does some very sharp things. They did a test, not just on all the woke crap in the military. We'll set that aside for a moment. They did a test on our equipment, our readiness, our training. Are we ready to go? And man, we are not ready to go at all. Let's talk to the Colonel about that. Joining me now, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel Dakota Wood, Semper Fi, Colonel. All right, it's your index. You edited it. I did not. It's obviously an eye-popping headline, finding out we have a military that isn't ready. What is this thing?
Yeah, so we look at capacity, the size of the military. Can it do all the things we expect it to do? Is it ready? Are pilots flying, are gunners shooting, are ships sailing? And then is it modern enough? Do you have old equipment or do you have new? And so this index is basically a report card, and it says, how is our military doing this year? It's too small, it has ancient equipment, and people aren't flying, shooting, or driving to the levels that they should. So we looked at all the military services and could only come to that conclusion that overall, not the character of the people, right? I mean, the people are working their hearts out, but the size of the military and all that, it's just in a weak state of affairs.
Okay, let's focus on the first one of those things. You mentioned, is it big enough to do all the things it needs to do? Well, what is this index saying it needs to do? What are we needing to do that we're not doing right now?
Well, you need to be able to go to war in more than one place at a time. So we looked at every major instance of U.S. military power being used. Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraqi freedom, and a host of other studies in the 90s and early 2000s. And they all come to about the same conclusion, that it takes, for example, 15 Marine Corps battalions if the Marine Corps is called into war. So if you have something like Russia invading Ukraine, or China invading Taiwan, or Iran trying to attack Israel, I mean, something like that, and the U.S. were to get involved, you have to be able to take care of one and not have used all of your military such that another competitor enemy uses that as an opportunity, or an exploitable opportunity to do what they want to do. So we've got obligations all over the world. We've got interests all over the world, economic relationships, and the current military in its size is really only able to do one major war of a regional sort of nature. And the reason we give it such a weak rating is, even if you invested everything, old equipment, and not training enough, we think it's now at a questionable level of capability to be able to handle even one major fight.
Old equipment. Why is our equipment old? You look at the budget, as I know you know very well, and the military budget is gigantic, and you think to yourself, man, that must be spending a fortune on new tech and fancy drones and everything every single year. But to hear you describe it, we are running steamships out there. Why are we old? How did we get old so fast?
Most of the equipment was purchased under the Reagan presidency and fielded in the early 90s. All the defense spending that goes on kind of maintains that, right? But it doesn't replace it as fast as the old stuff is taken out of the system. So when we had heightened spending over the last decade, that was to fund current operations. It's not a peacetime military exercising. You're actually doing combat ops, so munitions, fuel, flight hours on airplanes. And so that heightened spending was all in consumables. So right now, the average age of an Air Force fighter, F-15s, F-16s, that sort of thing, is 32 years old. Our ICBM fleet, the Minuteman III missiles and silos, were purchased in 1973. They were meant to be there for about 10 years, and now we've had them for 50. Our aerial refueler, the tanker aircraft that the Air Force uses, are averaging 50, 55, sometimes 60 years old. So it's stuff that we bought decades ago. We've used the heck out of it, and our replacement rates just aren't anywhere near the level of usage.
Okay, I want to focus on two things then if we're talking about getting old, because to be frank, I don't stress as much about the Army or Marine Corps, my beloved Marine Corps, getting old. Not that they don't need to be modern, but Air Force and Navy, when they get old, they can't catch up quickly if it goes down somewhere. How much older is our Air Force and our Navy versus, let's say, a near peer out there, China or somebody?
Yeah, so China has been modernizing for the last 10 or 15 years. So even if they started introducing new stuff 15 years ago, that's still half as old as the stuff that we're flying, driving, and sailing, right? So you've had a dramatic expansion in the Chinese naval fleet from the low 200s, about 212 ships or so just 15 years ago, to now 360. Meanwhile, our fleet, since the Cold War, it was near 600 ships, is down to 292. I checked the numbers this morning, and by the 2027 or so, we'll drop down to 280. So, I mean, China has nearly double the fleet. If you look at it on a ship-by-ship comparison with the 60 ships that the Indo-Pacific Command usually has in their area against 360 PLAN, the PLA Navy ships, you're at a 6-to-1 disadvantage. So China has been modernizing for the last decade. Our stuff has been used at combat level rates and has not been replaced. And so they've got a much newer military learning lessons from us and stealing our intellectual property and research and development findings, while our stuff is being used and it continues to age.
Okay, let's go to the training portion of it, because you mentioned we're not out there blowing things up all the time in training. Now, that's news to me. I got out of the Marine Corps in '04. That's all we ever did was go out and do shoots and things like that. Have things changed in that recent time?
Yeah, they have. You know, the average soldier or Marine Corps infantryman has a lot of small arms ammunition, but when you go to an anti-armor weapon like a javelin or a TOW or something like that, they're so expensive, on a per unit basis that maybe one person gets to shoot a live round and they're using practice rounds for other sorts of things. So, again, consumables during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, lots of people shooting a lot of things, but then you have to replace those inventories. And we haven't been doing it. And we're getting a lot of it now to Ukraine to sustain their fight against Russia. When it comes to flight hours, again, Cold War is a great reference, major global competitor opponent there. Pilots would fly easily 250, 300, or in excess of 300 hours a year. Today, the average Air Force pilot is averaging less than 120 hours a year. They fly like once a week for about an hour and a half or thereabouts. So you just can't maintain competency if you're doing something for an hour or two once a week, and you go throughout the year.
All right, Colonel, finally, last question. Marines, you actually graded all the branches. Air Force did the worst. The Marines did the best. You actually gave them a strong grade. Why? What are they doing the others aren't?
Well, they've really putting their money into a modernization program. So they have almost an entirely new fleet of aviation, MV-22s, F-35B, the latest iterations of their attack helicopters. So the air arm is very good. The old amphibious assault vehicle that you would remember so well, purchased in 1972, that is being replaced by a new vehicle, the amphibious combat vehicle. So they've got new gear coming in, new optics, new weapons, new sensors. Very, very serious about making sure that current readiness and the relevance of the force to near-term fights is right where it needs to be. So we're really excited about the energy and the focus in that service.
Semper Fi, Colonel. Appreciate it.